Welcome to PastFinders. Today's guest is Jim L. Mallory, Vice Chairman of the Lewis and Clark Trust Incorporated. And he's going to talk about Lewis and Clark, basically connected to Kentucky. How many people know that Clark actually came to Russellville? Got a few people?
It came to Russellville.
Came to Russellville.
On purpose.
On purpose. Didn't take a wrong turn and ended up here. Actually came here to find out why he came.
Okay, good.
And so without further ado, give a big hand. Thank you.
Thank you all. You're very kind. And if you can't hear me, tell me to speak up, or we'll try to get the mic increase for you. It's a real pleasure to be in Russellville this afternoon, and I'm here with my wife, the lady in the silver hair back in the corner, my Sacagawea. Paula likes to say she follows 10 paces behind, carries a water bottle and briefcase. Let me assure you, I did not bring a briefcase, and I'm not 50 miles from home. All of you are old enough, and I say that respectfully because I'm older than anybody in this room, or I believe I am. I was 13 months old when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. The old adage is that anybody is an expert when they're 50 miles from home with a briefcase. I did not bring the briefcase, and I'm not 50 miles from where I was born. I was born down 431 in Penrod. I pointed out the house that's no longer there where I was born. So I'm with friends tonight. It's a real pleasure to be back in Russellville and feel the heat that I know you can feel in Russellville in the summertime. My jacket's laying up here, and I'm going to talk in my shirt sleeves tonight. But the Lewis and Clark story is a huge story, and I'm challenged tonight telling you a coherent story that took place over at least 7 years, but I've got to do it in about an hour. Ask questions when we're over if you'd like. Interrupt me if you'd like to. If you find me boring and you want to go to sleep, have at it. I just ask that you not snore. I don't speak from a canned speech or read a presentation. I talk from what I know. And I only talk about stuff that I can prove, that I could raise my hand on a witness stand and speak from facts about Lewis and Clark. After a while, we will get to the point here we'll put a screen up and have Mark put a screen up of our website and some maps on there. I told Mark earlier, when I leave tonight, this book belongs to the library. If you haven't read Undaunted Courage, do so. I happen to have known the author, Stephen Ambrose. Stephen Ambrose was a great writer, but he was a better storyteller. And he was a great writer because he could tell stories. He could tell stories on a level that everybody could understand. Yes, he was a PhD professor in history. He wrote the memoirs for Eisenhower, Nixon, several other people. The World War II Museum in New Orleans today is a birth from Stephen Ambrose. This book right here tells the story of Lewis and Clark. It has citations in it. It's not smoke and hope. I mentioned to Mark earlier, you don't have to tell the story of Lewis and Clark in smoke and hope, as I call it. The facts are more exciting than what you could dream up in Hollywood. Read Undaunted Courage. I do caution you. It is so good, at 1 o'clock in the morning, you will say, if I shut one eye and only read with the other eye, I can read one more chapter. It's good. If you buy the book, and I buy books, used books online, if you buy the book and you don't like it, send me a note. And my business card's over there with enough information on it to have me summoned. If you don't like the book, just send me a note and say, Mallory, you're crazy as hell. And I'll refund your money, but you send me the book because I buy them and give them away. It's a great book. Stephen used another source, the original journals of Lewis and Clark, and this is not one of the journals, it's a reprint of the journals. The journals are at the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, And if you talk about writing and fine script and a fine hand, you see it right here. You're welcome to look at it, but please don't take my copy. I had to pay blood money to get this copy. The story of Lewis and Clark for years has been portrayed as a Western story. It's wrong. If you want to accuse me of being a revisionist historian, go ahead. I wear that badge on my back proudly. The story of Lewis and Clark started in Thomas Jefferson's mind. And if you want to get in a betting contest with somebody, and I'm not a bettor or gambler, but if you want to get into a betting contest with somebody, take the bet. Bet heavy, and I'll cover you. It started in Thomas Jefferson's mind, and we can use Ambrose to prove it. Jefferson was curious, probably the most curious man that ever lived other than me. I get up in the middle of the night to look for things, then go back to bed. Jefferson was the same way. In 1783, he asked William Clark's older brother, this is after the Revolution, he asked George Rogers Clark, the Hannibal of the West, to take a small group of men and explore the West. We didn't own the Louisiana Purchase. Jefferson was just curious about what was out there. George declined for two reasons. First of all, his health, he had arthritis, very bad, probably worse than mine, but he also was in debt. The Virginia legislature had not paid the Revolutionary War debts that George Rogers Clark put his name on the line and signed for. He was financially bankrupt. He didn't go. There are other people, and I want to mention these people. A man named John Armstrong, he was a Revolutionary War veteran. He went as far as St. Louis and gave up. He told, and that was probably an initiative from the United States Army that Armstrong went on. Jefferson was never aware of that. But the other two people, Jefferson was aware of and helped support them. One of them was a man named André Michel, a French botanist, became involved in French espionage in the United States. He was found out about. They stopped him on the Ohio River, kicked his tail out of the country. The other one was a man named John Ledyard. Ledyard had been on one of Captain Cook's exploration cruises. He met Jefferson in France when Jefferson there was a diplomat. He had an idea. He wanted to go explore the North American continent west to east as opposed to east to west. He was going to go across Russia with his two dogs, cross the Bering Strait, get into western United States, and go, come on down, sir. There are handout materials on that table over if you'd like to take them before you sit down. Jefferson actually encouraged him to do this. There was only one fly in the ointment. The Russian Tsarina didn't want him making that exploration. She sent a detail after him just before he got out of Russia, took him back to St. Petersburg, threw him out of Russia. In 1803, Jefferson has been elected president of the United States. Suddenly, he has the power of the presidency and the money to start the exploration. He asked Meriwether Lewis, an Army captain, 1st Regiment of Infantry, to become his secretary. Lewis and Jefferson start planning on the expedition almost immediately. On the 18th day of January, 1803, Lewis hand-delivered a request to Congress. He went from the, and I'm going to use the proper word, President's House. It wasn't the White House at that time. He went from the President's House to Congress and delivered a message requesting $2,500. Congress approved the expenditure on 23 January. Very quick for Congress to do something. Now let's stop and think right there. We know from records in the War Department that the expedition cost the United States, the American taxpayer, about $40,000, under $50,000. The $2,500 versus what it really costs, is the first example of government cost overrun. Nothing has changed at all except the amounts is what we're dealing with. In my handout for you, there is a timeline. I don't like to talk from timelines. I like to talk about people, living, breathing people just like each of you. So when it says timeline, I'm going to touch on a few places in here, but I'm going to move through it pretty darn quick. Once again, I'm challenged with telling a story in a short period of time here. The expedition was successful because of Kentuckians. I'm going to make the assumption that everybody in this room is either a Kentuckian or has lived here long enough to know how contrary and determined we can be. Don't wave that flag in front of me and tell me something can't be done. I'll stay after it just to prove you wrong. An example of that is the first effort to complete the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. I know whose computer the first letter to Congress is written on in 2003. It was written to the late Jim Bunning. It was only it took until 2019 to get the addition added to the trail from St. Louis, or Wood River, Illinois, technically, to Pittsburgh. 16 years. I was told repeatedly by the Park Service in Washington, you'll never get an inch. We didn't. Through physical determination and citizens in this country, just like you, we got 1,200 miles. Now, I was told later on, that was a major accomplishment. I said, yes, but we didn't get it all. Why don't we tell the full story and give it to the people all over the United States, equal value, equal chance to use that story? And I'll get back to that in a few minutes. Kentuckians, those contrary Kentuckians are spelled out in this book right here. And Mark, if you can find a copy of this online, please get it for your library. 9 young men from Kentucky by George Yater. George was right, except he left out 2 people. Once again, I'm a revisionist historian. He didn't include Clark nor York in here. We're going to talk about York in just a few minutes. This is the basis that I'd like to talk about the people that made the Lewis and Clark expedition happen. They were all mixture of races, education, ethnics, ethnologies, sex. We had Sacagawea. We even had a dog. It was a literally important part of the story of Lewis and Clark. Seaman, the Newfoundland dog that went on the expedition. Let's talk about York. York's my favorite, so I want to put him first. York was an African-American slave and servant of William Clark. He was a body servant. Everybody else on the expedition had an option. They raised their hand, they were sworn into the army, or they were paid. York wasn't. William Clark literally said, York, we're going on this expedition with Meriwether Lewis to explore the western United States. Get your stuff together, we're gone. We didn't know until a few years ago that York was actually married when he left Louisville and left for the expedition. York is my hero because a man that's a slave carried on with great dignity, tremendous responsibility during the expedition. He carried a rifle, he hunted, he brought in game. He was a nurse to Charles Floyd when Charles Floyd had a ruptured appendix and died, the only man in the expedition to die. When Sacagawea gave birth to young Pomp, York was a nurse. The man cooked the meals for Lewis and Clark and that group. He did what he had to do. To me, that makes the man very important. My stomach says it's very important. Mr. and Mrs. Ray brought my dinner tonight over at Roy's. Having my stomach filled allows me to stand up here and talk tonight. York filled stomachs. He found greens in the river to add to their diet, and their diet was, my wife's a dietitian. She turns up her nose at the food they ate. We've had great arguments in our house about their recording of eating 9 pounds of meat a day. But they were expending more energy than a pro football player expends in a game. Dragging a keel boat up the Missouri River against the water with several tons of equipment on it, making 20 miles a day, you better believe you're going to expend energy and you're going to eat 9 pounds of meat a day. I've actually gone to school and taken with me 32 Big Macs. That's a quarter pounder without the lettuce, tomato, pepper, and all mustard and all that stuff, just 32 of them, and asked the children, would you like to eat what Lewis and Clark ate today? And let them, how long would it take you to eat those 32 Big Macs stacked up? Just the burgers. Most of them start laughing. I couldn't do that in a week. That's how much meat they were eating, and that's how York helped fill their stomachs with the game he helped kill. He wasn't the only one, but that's why York's important. One of the other men, and I mentioned him already, is Charles Floyd. Charles Floyd is a young man from the Falls of the Ohio. He was known to Clark before Lewis brought the keel boat down to Louisville. He was carrying the mail between Louisville and Vincennes, Indiana. Very responsible young man. He did have probably, we don't know. The journal's recording his death as having jaundice. Jaundice is not a cause of death, it's a symptom of death. The yelling of the eyes and skin. So, and I'm not a medical professional, but it's a disease created by the liver and the rupture of that appendix. He probably had a ruptured appendix. The only member of the expedition to die. Two of the other men that are important in George's book are the Field brothers, Joseph and Reuben. Joseph was the older. He had worked in the Bullitt Salt Works, Bullitt County, Kentucky. The headwaters were up on the Salt River. He knew how to boil down the salt, cut the trees, keep a fire going, boil down that salt water, mineral water, ship it down the Salt River to West Point for distribution throughout the country. Reuben was a younger brother. He's written in the journals as being a very fast runner, a very wiry individual. Reuben and Meriwether Lewis are the only two people in that expedition that killed a human being. We will get around to it in a little bit, but briefly, Reuben was with, and Joseph was with Meriwether Lewis up on the Marias River, and it's in your outline. They met up with some Blackfeet Indians, and it's Blackfeet, not foot. Met up with them. Early the next morning, the Indians tried to steal their weapons. As a former member of the United States Army, I was told I was an expert with a rifle. I never had to fire a shot in defense or anger. But I'm committed to this day. You steal my rifle, and you're in trouble. Even an old man of my age, I'll take you on, just to see how far I can go with it. Reuben actually caught up with the Indian with his rifle and stabbed the Indian to death, dropped him. Lewis got up in the scuffle and fired on another Indian. There's a little controversy of this, and Lewis said it was a gut shot. You tell me, you take a wound in 1806 with a muzzle-loading pistol, that the man didn't die. There's stories within the Indian nations that he didn't die, he lived. Believe what you want to. I think there were two of them that died. The chance of death with a belly wound in that day and time without a professional taking care of it is death. It's the only way I can think of it. Let's talk about Sacagawea. Not in the book. Sacagawea is a young Indian woman that they met at Fort Mandan. Fort Mandan is near Bismarck, North Dakota today. Sacagawea was a 16-year-old child, a young woman, pregnant, with Toussaint Charbonneau's child. Toussaint Charbonneau was hired as a guide because Charbonneau said he knew the way west. the more important person was Sacagawea. She was Shoshone. Today we call them Eastern Shoshone, from the Lemhi Valley of Idaho. Lewis and Clark already had known from the Mandan Indians they needed horses when they left the rivers and started overland. But they knew that the Shoshones had the horses. She was the bridge to getting those horses, and she did. There are more monuments to Sacagawea today in this country than any other of the 32 members of the Lewis and Clark expedition. She's been painted as a guide. She's been painted as many things. Her importance goes more to the diplomatic side. For the tribal people, they did not take a woman on a campaign or on a raiding party. It wasn't done. She went on, when the Indians would see them, there was a woman with a child on her back. They didn't know what this party was, but they knew it was not a raiding party. It was a symbol to them. Women didn't go on raiding parties or fight and get in fights with them. That was a bridge of peace right there. And by the way, I should say, Jefferson in his instructions, and we have those instructions today, they're extant. You can find them online. One of the points that Jefferson pointed out to Lewis in his 3 or 4 pages of instructions, his orders, as I call them, military orders. Don't get in a fight with Indians. Be peaceful. Make peace with these people. And for the most part, it was. Other than the Blackfeet and an occurrence with the Sioux, Teton Sioux, it was a peaceful group. And they tried to make peace with them. In the case of the Nez Perce remained friendly with the United States until the Nez Perce War of 1877. Great relationship between the tribal people. And believe me, these are people not understanding each other's cultures. There's a cultural difference between the tribal people and Lewis and Clark, and they're both trying to understand each other, what they're all about, what they're doing. That's simple enough right there. A cultural conflict. They're trying to mentally to figure this thing out. One of the other points in your timeline that I want to give special attention to is in November 1805. November 1805, they have reached the West Coast. They've seen the Pacific Ocean. They're trying to figure out where to spend the winter of 1805, 1806. There was a determination that we need to figure out this thing. It's been called a controversial thing. It's been called a vote. In the United States Army, there's no votes. There's no, well, what would you all like to do? No one in the Army asked me what I wanted to do. I was told what to do, and I carried out the orders to the very best of my ability. But they gathered everybody together to determine where they wanted to spend the winter of 1805, 1806. And that was the question. Where do you want to spend the winter? And these people all voted except Seaman, including York, Sacagawea, George Reard. They all had a vote. They wound up going to the south side of the Columbia River, where they had been told there were elk and the weather was more trees over there to build a fort. The north side, I've been there. There are very few trees on the north side, but there are nice trees for making a fort on the south side. York voted 50 years before emancipation. Sacagawea voted 125 years before suffrage for women. And Duryar voted before the Snyder Act that allowed American Indians to vote, much later. It was in the 1920s before this came about. I like to put it this way. It wasn't a vote. It wasn't a diplomatic thing. It was leadership. Lewis and Clark got buy-in. If you want somebody to gripe and growl, ask them, okay, what's your opinion? What do you want to do? If it goes sour, They don't have a say because they are part of the decision that you're being made. And that's exactly what happened when they went to the south side and built Fort Clampside. Their return was started back. They actually hoped they would find an American ship on the Pacific coast that winter. They did not find one. And if you've ever been on the Pacific coast, I can assure you, please let me assure you, no ship wants to be there. I've been there in fog, rain, hail, snow, all in the same 10-minute period of time. It's nasty. They had very little sunshine. I think only about 8 or 10 days of sunshine in the entire period, maybe 12 or 14 days of no rain. It's not a very conducive place to spend the winter. They start back early just to get away from the mess. They were killing very little game. The game they were killing were they're only using the hides. So they start back. They get back to the Nez Perce. They've got to get across the Bitterroot Mountains. I don't know whether any of you have been in Rocky Mountains or not. You see snow on the mountains in the summertime in July. And that's exactly what they were experiencing. They had to wait 46 days before they were able to get back across the mountains. And they had to use Nez Perce guides to help get across the mountains. Nez Perce pulled their bacon out of the fire. Once again, there was a strong relationship between the Euros from the Lewis and Clark expedition and the Nez Perce people. They eventually get back to Fort Mandan, and now we're going to talk about one of the other young men from Kentucky. A young man named John Coulter. If you've never read anything on John Coulter, you've got another treat coming. John Coulter was the first mountain man. As they neared Fort Mandan, they met two other Kentuckians going up the Missouri River, a man named Dixon and Forrest. They were already going upriver to trap for beaver. They convinced John Coulter, buy in with them, go back. Now, I don't know what happened to Dixon and all. Those two guys disappeared from history. Did they get killed by Indians? They die in the winter? But they disappear. The next spring, John Coulter is going down the Missouri River in a dugout heading for St. Louis, and he meets a trapping party, a large trapping party going up the Missouri River. They convince him to go back for the second time. He goes back for the second time, and if you read a story on John Coulter, he and John Potts, another member of the expedition, got to the Three Forks of the Missouri, Madison, Gallatin, and Jefferson, had an engagement with Blackfeet. Potts was killed. Coulter was stripped of all of his clothes. The chief decided he'd have a little fun. And he asked Coulter, he said, "Can you run?" Coulter said, "No, I'm very slow," lying through his teeth. The chief said, "Okay, I'm going to give you X number of yards run ahead, and then I'm going to turn loose my braves and let them come after you." Coulter outran them. No clothes on, naked as he could be the day he was born. He finally, one of the Indians catches up with him, gets close to him. Coulter turns around, grabs his spear and stabs him, runs and gets in a beaver lodge, and that night they finally quit looking for him. Read John Coulter. It's another book that'll hold your attention. He finally made his way back to Fort Manuel without clothes on, gets back to Fort Manuel, eventually gets back to St. Louis. His trip and his tour through the Yellowstone country is on William Clark's 1804 map. We know that he or someone told Clark what the tour was he took in the winter through Yellowstone Park. If you look at a big map of Yellowstone, a historic map, you're going to find the notes, little dots, and says Coulter's path on there. 23 September 1806, they arrived back in St. Louis. They were the Lazarus group. They were in skin clothing. They looked like the Dickens. They had an Indian chief from the Mandans with them going to the president's house. They had to get clothing for him. They sell off, as Jefferson had told them, they sell off their equipment. pay off their men the best way they can. And on 19 October, they head for the east via Vincennes, Indiana, Louisville, Kentucky, Crab Orchard, Kentucky, Cumberland Gap, following the Boone Trace Wilderness Road. They go up the Great Valley Road to Virginia. Now, let's pause right there. On the 5th day of November, they arrived in Louisville. We know that for a fact from Jonathan Clark's journal. Jonathan Clark kept a journal every day. It's mainly full of weather reports, not much else. But on the 5th day, he makes a note, Captain Clark and Captain Lewis return today. On the 8th day of November, they had a Thanksgiving at Historic Locust Grove in Louisville. I hope each of you have had a chance to go to Historic Locust Grove. It is one of the few houses in the nation that both Lewis, Clark, York, members of the expedition, were in. They were there having a celebration. They opened boxes of their souvenirs, the material they brought from the west at Jefferson's direction. Skins, horns, maps, their journals. They're all looking at it like a bunch of kids, like I would, be on the floor looking at all this stuff. Lewis leaves Louisville a few days before Clark. Now, once again, I'm going to talk about people and the human interest side. Lewis goes to Frankfort with Pierre Chateau and a group of Osage Indians. They separate, the two groups separate in Frankfort. Pierre Chateau is leading his group of Osage Indians to Washington. I suspect, and this is suspicion on my part, it's easier to feed 2 or 3 people or a small group of people than it is a large group of people. And they separated simply logistically for food. Pierre Chateau and the Osage went to Frankfort, to Lexington, to Maysville, Kentucky, took the northern route through Ohio and Pennsylvania to Washington, D.C. to meet with Jefferson. Another point in the Jefferson's instructions, send these tribal people to Washington so we can talk to them. Lewis takes his route from Frankfort down through Mercer, Anderson County, Mercer County, Lincoln County, Stanford, Mount Vernon, London, and out through the Cumberland Gap. Now to the human side of it. Clark and York remained in Louisville. Now Clark had his mind screwed on right. He's been in the wilderness for 2 years, 8 months. He's got his mind on a woman, something to eat, and clothes. 3 priorities. He is going to go to Fincastle, Virginia, and court Julia Clark, Julia Hancock. He went to Fincastle. He was dressed in because he had clothes made in Louisville. We know for a fact he bought piece goods in Louisville from Fitzhugh and Rose store, and the price of that piece goods, or what kind of piece goods he got. He was going a man to go court a woman. The man had his mind right. He also had a chance to eat some decent food and sleep in a decent bed.
Did you say Rose or Rhodes?
Rhodes.
It became Rhodes right through the same company?
Say that again, Stephen.
Became Rhodes right here after that?
Rose, Fitzhugh and Rose, R-O-S-E. The courtship was successful, but Colonel Hancock told him, said, she's awfully young. This marriage takes place a year from now. 8 January 1808. He gets back to Virginia, or back to Fincastle, and marries the young woman. Very successful marriage. They had children. She was a loving mother, and we're going to see in a few minutes her experience right here in Russellville. Lewis is made governor of the Upper Louisiana Territory as a reward. That was sent to Congress. Congress approved that one. But also, Clark was nominated as a lieutenant colonel. Congress refused. They wouldn't break protocol in advancing Clark over other people. So they sent the nomination back to Jefferson. Jefferson's smart. Jefferson said, okay, if Congress won't do it, I want William Clark to be the superintendent of Indian Affairs, which I can appoint. And he made Clark superintendent of Indian Affairs for the Upper Louisiana Territory and brigadier general for the Missouri Militia. Congress had nothing to do with it. It was all Jefferson's decision. It was fair. William Clark served as superintendent of Indian Affairs until his death in 1838. So let's stop right there and talk about why William Clark came through southern Kentucky, through Todd County, Logan County, and Warren County. The two officers, Lewis and Clark, had authorization to write bills of exchange. Today we call them checks on the federal government for services. Go ahead, Mark, put that up now. They wrote the bills of exchange, but if a bill of exchange was refused in Washington by the Secretary of War, that bill came back to the individual writing it, just like a cold check would come back on us today, and they were responsible for it. Bureaucrats being what bureaucrats do, some of their bills of exchange are rejected. One of them for Meriwether Lewis was as little as $18 for translating the laws that he had written for Missouri, for the Upper Louisiana Territory, from English to Spanish. Most of the citizens of that time in Missouri and the Upper Missouri Territory were Spanish-speaking people. It was rejected. So they had to go to Washington to explain why they're writing these bills of exchange. Clark had some as well. Lewis leaves a few days before Clark in a boat down the Mississippi River, winds up at Grinder's stand, kills himself. Yes, I said he killed himself. I'm of the belief that Lewis took his own life, and I don't hold that against Lewis. I give Lewis credit for what he accomplished while he was living. That's all we can ask. Clark, a few days later, in a carriage, a young wife, a 9-month-old child, and 3 slaves. Those slaves are important because they're helping get this party moved to Washington. Those slaves have names. We know from Clark's 1809 journal that's on this website of ours, we know that their names were Scott, Chloe, and their child Rachel. In the world of slavery, having a first name recorded in a historic journal is almost unheard of. We know their names. They were here. They were in Russellville. They take the carriage down what's known as the old military roads in Illinois, St. Louis, Kaskaskia, cross the river at Lusk Ferry, today's Golconda, Illinois area. Came to Centertown, Princeton, Hopkinsville, Elkton, Russellville, and Bowling Green. When they got to Elkton, they stayed with Colonel Anthony New, Revolutionary War veteran. It just so happens that New and Clark were both from Caroline County, Virginia, so they had a thread of conversation. Unfortunately, we don't know what they talked about that night. Did I pick up a copy or give them all to you? Somewhere in the journals, you have a copy of William Clark's handwriting from Colonel New, Russellville, and Bowling Green, and his handwriting. If somebody wants to argue with you about William Clark being here, let them argue. But once again, bet big, and I'll cover your bet, because we got to have William Clark's handwriting telling when he was here. He describes a better description of Russellville in 1809, October 1809, early October 1809, than I have found in any other history books. I've had that for several years. But the other night I sat down and said to myself, okay, did anybody else ever write this up? I went through 6 books, history books of Kentucky, including Russellville, and did not find a record of William Clark being here. We know he was here because he talks about who he saw here and who he was with here. He described the number of brick houses, the number of frame houses, the number of log houses. He even said it was dry and dusty. He stayed with the Temple family. Now, why the Temple family? Eleanor Temple was his niece. She was the daughter of Jonathan Clark, his oldest brother, living in Louisville, Kentucky. Eleanor had married Benjamin Temple, a Revolutionary War veteran. They were living here in Russellville. I don't come to a local place and tell you your history. I bring what I can share with you from facts. I've seen too many people stand in front of a group just like you and get eaten alive because they thought they knew more about your history than you did. I will not do that. I need to ask you for help on several things. I understand from Mark, and I have the information here, where the Temple house was in Russellville. But the other question is, where was that blacksmith or that wagon repairman that repaired the single tree on Clark's coach carriage to get, it was broken between Elton and Russellville? Where was that building? When we look at the website up here, their meals were family meals just like each of us experience. One night or one meal, Clark makes a comment about the sweetmeats that Eleanor had just made. Now, I'm not a cook. My wife's a wonderful cook. I don't know what a sweetmeat is except what I read in the recipe that Clark wrote down in his journal. I told Ms. Basham in 2006, to me, the description is more like 14-day pickles my mother used to make. And so the ladies in 2006, when we dedicated the marker down at the courthouse, made 14-day pickles. They were darn good 14-day pickles. If you like pickles of that type, you'll like them. Look at the recipe on our website, and I can't encourage you enough. That website was built for you to use, not for our bragging rights or anything else. I don't need medals and monuments. It's made for my grandchildren, your grandchildren. And that's why we want it used. But Mark, if you can move to the location of Clark's Journal, 1809. I'll continue to chat for a second here while that's coming up. Can you bring that up, Mark, at number 4? Yeah, just click on it and bring it up so we can see the full content of it. That sweetmeat recipe is on there. They were human beings. They talked about the dirt, the dust, the travesties they had along the way, the broken axle tree. That, to me, today, that'd be like a front end of a car going out. You don't manage or work a wagon or a carriage with a broken single tree. I would suspect they tied it together, rope to get on into Russellville. But it had to be repaired, and they got it repaired right here in Russellville. Click on the view in blue and see if that won't bring it up.
Taking its time.
Oh,
It's slow.
They leave here, they travel through. There you go, right there. They leave here, travel through Auburn. They stopped in Auburn and got it at Mr. Temple's mill and got a piece of rope. They traveled on past West Union, Shaker Village. They weren't taking gas yet, serving meals yet, but they had to pass that because 68 hadn't changed. They stopped at Mr. Reed's and spent the night, and the next morning got up as usual, very early, and they were in Bowling Green at Mr. Vance's. Is there anybody here from Bowling Green or Warren County? Gosh, I've got to go camp out in Bowling Green because there's a story on Vance it's recorded in one of the church manuals over there that I've seen, but I've never been able to buy the book. Said he had the appearance and gait of an elephant, and they estimated he weighed just short of 400 pounds. That's a heavyweight individual right there. He was also noted in this church history of not liking the fact that his wife was very religious, and they conducted religious meetings in the tavern on Sunday morning. And when he got tired of hearing about the sermons and so forth, he'd ring a bell very loud to interrupt the meeting. It doesn't say anything at all about what Ms. Vance said about this, but that's the story on him. We do know what they paid for breakfast that morning, and they moved on up 31W, paralleling I-65 today. Your story is important. Clark wrote more words in the 1809 journal because he was here and his family here. The Lewis and Clark Trust was formed for 2 or 3 reasons. 2 of them is stated in our mission statement. Preservation of the Lewis and Clark story, Lewis and Clark Trail, in cooperation with the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. Notice that the Lewis in cooperation with a federal agency is last. All people is what we're interested in. My grandchildren, your children, grandchildren, maintaining the legacy of Lewis and Clark. They were successful, and now I'm preaching. They were successful for 3 reasons, 3 simple reasons: perseverance, shared responsibility, and pride in accomplishment. Those 3 simple things will make you successful in any time. They made Lewis and Clark successful in their exploration of the West, and they will make people successful today. I challenge anybody, and I've been throwing this challenge out for 25 years. You live by those 3 things and you're going to be successful. I don't care what you want to do. Whether you want to be president of the world or the best ditch digger in Russellville, it'll make you successful. They made Lewis and Clark successful. We, as Lewis and Clark Trust, we want to see that success go down generations. We have a mission to spread the word of Lewis and Clark. That auto tour route sign over there, Lewis and Clark Trail auto tour route sign, needs to be in the 1st District. It needs to be in Logan County. I vote in the 6th District. I don't vote in the 1st District. I don't have the power to vote down here. I don't live down here. You do. And we're pleading with you to take that in your mind. And one of the other handouts, there's draft legislation that we've already submitted to James Comer, your congressman. I don't care what your politics are. This is non-political. We want to see the trail completed. It doesn't cost. We don't want dirt. We don't want to buy an inch of dirt. It follows existing highways. It follows from Lusk Ferry, Centertown, Princeton, Hopkinsville, Elkton, Russellville, on east to Washington, D.C. I'm not going to live long enough to spend another 16 years fighting in Congress to get this done. You're the key. We're asking you to write your congressman, write Jim Comer, write your state senator, Mike Wilson, write your local legislator, Jason Petrie. Ask them to ask James Comer to introduce that legislation. That same legislation and appeal has gone to every congressman and senator in the state of Kentucky. Kentucky should take the lead. Kentuckians made it happen. And we need to take the lead today. Not only will it take care of Kentucky, it'll take care of 10 other states, including Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, and the eastern part of Pennsylvania, as well as covering the part of Illinois and Indiana they covered in 1806. Most people go to Congress and they're asking for a lot of money. I have to digress and tell you my first experience about asking for an appointment in Congress. I'd never done that before, but I finally made up my mind. I'm not going to be held back. I'm going to give it a try. had appointments, long list and all the details and time and everything. And I went to the first appointment, and I'm sitting in a little ante room waiting for my appointment time to come. Another group went into the conference room, and I could hear everything they were talking about. There was no ceiling over it. And the lady asked the congressional staffer, she said, now last year you gave us $10 million, and this year we need $15 million. I like to fell out of my chair. For $10 million in leverage, I can turn the world upside down. And the staffer said, well, what did you do with the $10 million you got last year? Collectively, we can't laugh and stutter and stammer enough to express what that woman was saying. She never did answer him. I know where that money went to. She had rings on her fingers that I can't imagine. Dressed to $1 million. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm asking for help and don't want money. I don't know whether I'm crazy or not, but that was my first experience in a congressional office building in Washington. We need to complete this trail, not for me, not for Stephanie, not for the trust, but for future generations. Help us. Please help us. I'll take questions and stay all night. But my wife will tell you I turn into a pumpkin about 8:30 or 9 o'clock, and I'm working on Eastern time. So, ask questions. I'll take your questions.
Can you slide that up so we can see those houses?
Sure.
They're in Russellville, right?
One of them is
Okay, yeah.
one of them there is Federal Grove. The other is Shakertown. I've been to look through Shaker journals. I'd give anything to know if they stopped there. We have no record of it. I tried to speak from facts that I could prove on a witness stand, and I can't prove it. I have been to the William Whitley House in Lincoln County 3 different times. I've looked for journals. They passed within 100 yards of it and didn't mention it. Surely to goodness, there was water. They stopped for water or something there. I mean, it's a first brick house west of the Allegheny Mountains. There's just no record of it. So I can only say, they probably stopped there, but I don't have any record of it. Yes?
In the discovery crew, how many were there? How many actually participated?
Depends on where you talk about it in time. The initial expedition was a group of temporary soldiers from Carlisle Barracks, helped Lewis get the keelboat down the river. That's a big question. Who were those people? With all military records in this world, we can't find it. And I've had interns searching as late as this last year. There was probably about 45 or 50 that helped them get the keelboat from Wood River to Fort Mandan or Bismarck, North Dakota. But the permanent party was 32 people, including young Pomp.
Now, didn't some of them decide, hey, we're going to go back?
They did.
And they didn't do very
Lewis and Clark expedition members did not have a good record of living. They were going back into the wilderness. We talked about Floyd's death probably because of appendicitis. But others went back into that wild country and didn't survive. I've already mentioned John Potts getting killed. Joseph Fields. Joseph Fields was probably killed by the Rickowas when trying to get Chief Shaheki back. They just didn't have a real good record. Sergeant Ordway just disappears from history. He had bought a lot of land near Tippity Bottoms. The earthquake of 1812 destroyed his farms. Very, very smart young man. A lot of property, a lot of land down there. But the earthquake destroyed it. He just disappears from history. If you have no more questions, thank you, but I hope you enjoy we do need your help. We ask you to write a simple letter. If you're a teacher or have a wife or someone's a teacher, one of the best sources of writing Congress are school children. I've had more than one congressional staffer tell me, when we get letters here from school children, we have to read them. We're compelled to read those stories. I have a friend and a teacher, retired teacher now, in Mississippi. She asked me one time, she said, how do we get attention to Congress? And I said, get your students involved. And she said, students? And I, oh yeah. I said, you'll get a letter back from your congressmen and your senators. She called me one day in the middle of the day. She says, I've got to call you quick. I'm at lunch. But said, we got a letter this morning from our congressman thanking us for our letters that students had written them. She said, their students are beside themselves. They've never had that kind of response from a member of Congress before. That has a major impact on elected officials. I normally ask in my groups, is there someone here that's an elected official? And sometimes I get timid hands put up. Is there an elected official here? Somebody's been elected official? I commend you. I was telling Steve Ray earlier, I was born into a political family. At my birth, my father was running for county tax commissioner down in Muhlenberg County. I was 10 years old before I realized you could talk about something at the dinner table beside politics. But it makes things happen. We have the worst government in the world, except when you compare it to all the other options out there. I don't care how bad you think it is, just turn and look at the rest of the world and how they're governed. We have an impact, and you can have an impact with this. I thank you for your time tonight. I don't have any idea what time it is. You've been very patient with me. Thank you.